for more updates on those peace talks. We can cross over now to Brussels. We can bring in our correspondent there, Shona Murray. Shona, good evening to you. Diplomatic efforts continue despite distressing scenes that we're seeing, obviously, in Ukraine. President Zelensky delivering a message to the Council of Europe, also Russia and Ukraine holding the fourth round of peace talks. But at this stage, are talks having an impact?
Well, that's right, Elena. Obviously, we know that those talks went on today, no breakthrough, and I suppose there's a question over whether a breakthrough can emerge. But I'm joined now by the former Russian Foreign Affairs Minister under Boris Yeltsin, and Andrei Kozyrev. Andrei, thank you very much for joining us this evening. First of all, what do you think at this point can materialise in relation to those talks?
I beg your pardon. What at this point?
Do you think can materialise from the ongoing talks between Ukraine and Russia?
Oh, the talks. I'm sorry. Nothing. It's just a show, you know, and they will not negotiate until they know for sure that they are losing in Ukraine. The Russians. That's the usual approach. They understand only force, only force. They tried force on their side, and they meet now with unexpected resistance from the Ukrainians and from the West, also with sanctions, which could be stronger, but it's strong enough probably for the moment. So. But they did not exhaust yet all the strategy of terror and all the strategy of the military bulldozer, as some are called. It's a policy of hot heads, you know, and only when they get a punch back, strong punch back, which soon probably is coming, they will start to think of ways to negotiate or escape.
So when you say they haven't exhausted everything, what do you mean is left for Putin to use, seeing as he's also asked for support from China, for example?
Yes, he's definitely in desperate position. China, and most ridiculous, of course, are those so-called volunteers from Syria. Those losers who could not sustain their own fight in Syria and and they are probably stooges, if not mercenaries, of Iran. So that failed state, failed regime now sends troops to fight on Russian side. I mean, it's disgusting, of course, and it's ridiculous, but it is a signal of their desperation. And China, I very much doubt that China would ever jump to a military conflict, or China is not an ally of Russia. China is, they are following their own interest, and their interest, of course, was and probably still is that Russia, that Putin kind of harasses the West because that serves Chinese interest since they are in growing controversy with the West, and that if Putin, the more Putin disrupts Russian economic relations on the Western side, so to say, then he is crawling, begging to China, and it already started. And be sure that Chinese are now good businessmen, and they will ask for considerable discount for Russian raw materials, which they are mostly buy raw materials from Russia.
Do you think, you just mentioned there that force is inevitable. Do you think that NATO is going to have to get involved with this fight for it to end eventually?
Well, I think NATO could and should be much more active and much more bold, if you want, because Putin is bold enough to say that the supply routes, which are used by the NATO countries and by America, are legitimate targets. To that, if I were head of NATO or American Pentagon, I would say, okay, but we'll put their Patriots near Polish-Ukrainian border, those anti-aircraft systems, and we will shoot anyone who will hit our routes, because our routes are legitimate. They are in response to legitimate government in Kiev, and your aggression is illegitimate. So we have much more, NATO has much more ground, moral, political ground, to show the resolve to use force in defense of their own routes, which are absolutely, and on those routes, there are not only weapons, but there are medical supplies. There could be a medical personnel who helps to train to use this medical equipment and many other things. So if they hit, they say it's a legitimate target, then many probably Poles and many Europeans and many Americans might be hit because they are supporting, they are following those equipment, like medical equipment.
Okay.
That's inadmissible. I would prohibit that if I were on NATO side. So there is room, and there is also room for Europeans with some sanctions, much more sanctions, because these sanctions which are now imposed on Russia, they are prolonged. It takes time. It's minimum 1 or 2 months before they start felt. But something immediately could be done.
Okay, Andrei Kozyrev, former Russian Minister for Foreign Affairs under President Boris Yeltsin, thank you very much for joining us this evening.